maybe 20 years old or something like that, there's already a shift. Like, what is the aim of development? It's not growth. It's about the relief of poverty, which you can see they could be coincident. I think that now, though, that growth has become properly biopolitical in the sense that growth is now not cast. The development is. Development is not cast in terms of growth, nor always just in terms of anti-poverty, but really in terms of health and life. Like that's what. So the Gates Foundation's program of global health is properly, I think, at the center of development today. Or the Millennium Villages of Sachs are also equally aimed at life. You know, and so it's not that they're not countable. They're always still accountable, but they're accountable now in terms of mosquito nets and rates of problems with pregnancies or eradicating a certain disease or something like that. But I think this is a fundamental change about what the shift from growth to life as what is meant by development. And one of the things that it shifts for us is, I think, no longer, like one could say previously, make the distinction, well, they're interested in economic development, we're interested in social development. Like they're interested in producing more goods, we're interested in constructing the community or something like that. I think that the contemporary notion of development, in terms of like in biopolitical terms, I hope that makes enough sense to you in terms of promotion of life and health, that blurs that distinction between the economic and the social in that sense. And so my question is like there's one thing that I don't know if I call it a academic exercise or a scholarly exercise, like trace what it is that's different in the meaning of development today. I think that's a useful first exercise. But then the second question is, well, what do we mean by development? Like, what do we want when we say we want development? And Raj, I think, quite helpfully was saying, well, it might not be that, like, we also want life. It's not that we also want health. I'm for both of those, by the way. But it might be a question about who controls that. The question of autonomy, participation, and then when you said sovereignty, we can bracket that for a minute. That maybe that is primarily a question. I think this comes back for me again to these two questions, two notions of the common. Like, for instance, when Raj and I were talking before, I was reminded of when we were talking these scenes that I've encountered innumerable times at World Social Forums in a panel and they're usually constructed to have this debate where it's usually an ecologist from France who's preaching degrowth, and then a trade unionist from South Asia who wants more jobs, for the union, for the workers, and they seem completely irreconcilable. There has to be they're completely pitted against one another, and it's a it's a industrial versus an ecological, it's a north versus a south, you get all the things playing off at once. And I think that it's mistake. I think we have to see somewhat differently what we mean, or what we could mean by development, that cuts diagonally across the seemingly intractable conflict between the recognition that we can't continue industrial growth without the destruction of the planet, on the one hand, and the recognition on the other hand that the poor in subordinated countries need work in order to survive. I mean, so it seems to me if you pose it in that terms, it's irreconcilable. Whereas I think partly by thinking through development in social and biopolitical terms, and then also in terms of who controls what, might shift that access and allow us to answer. I could pose it as a question to Raj, but or to you or something. It's a question that I don't think I can answer yet, which is, what do I mean by, what development do I want? Because I still do want development. Maybe that's or it still means something to me. And I don't mean when I say I want development, I want more factories making more cars. That's not what I mean. That's what I'm trying to call growth here. But I do want a kind of human development of life and community, and even more than human, maybe something like that. Do you see what I mean? Only defining our goals in subtractive terms is not sufficient for me. Like, I was thinking of this French economist Latouche, who preaches degrowth, décroissance, as the goal, which, fine, I mean, okay, we can have less factories and less cars, I could be on board with that, but that's not a political program to me. That's just a constraint in which we could have a political program. There you go. And I think for that, I need a notion of development. So maybe you can help with it, or you don't have to talk about
well,
that.
no, I'm conscious of the time, but maybe I can. I'll throw an answer, and it'll come with a question that will rest with you, and then maybe we can have questions from the floor. But I think now's the time to crack out the Spinoza. Spinoza. Spinoza is obviously a philosopher that's very much that informs a great deal of Michael's work, but also less obviously mine. But his, I mean, it seems to me that the kind of world that, well, let me get to Spinoza by going via peasant economy. So one of the visions that La Via Campesina is this international peasant movement, has over 150 million members around the world, and they have this idea of what it is that they want. And they seem to have this positive program. It's called food sovereignty. Now, the definition for food sovereignty is very, very long, but it involves things like, America should stop dumping its crops in the global south. The Europeans should stop doing the same thing. Monsanto should stop selling its crap. Agriculture should be removed from the World Trade Organization. There are also these sort of boundary conditions. But in essence, what it's calling for is a certain kind of autonomy. What they want is, what we want is for everyone to be able to decide food policy together. And then you push back. Well, what do you want? No. I want everyone to be able to decide for themselves what they want. And it sounds like a sort of fairly vapid program, where in fact what you're doing is abdicating taking a particular position on anything, and instead insisting that there be democracy. Now, in fact, before that happens, of course, you need much more equality. And I think this is one of the other things about the commons, of course, that it presupposes and that it requires is this question of equality. But in particular, what La Via Campesina's idea of food sovereignty requires, and one of the slogans for this program is that in order for food sovereignty to obtain, there needs to be an end to all forms of violence against women. Now, this is not just about domestic violence. This is about understanding violence in its, in its economic forms and its social forms. It's in fact sort of the obverse of a biopolitical development project. It's a sort of an emancipatory project that understands that resistance to violence flourishes in many ways. And I think that's where we also agree that there is a sort of rhizomatic network of resistance around the world. It's through organizations like the Campesina. So in some ways, I think we're agreed on that. But the reason that I want to get to Spinoza is because when one thinks of the kind of person and the kind of world in which we want to live, Spinoza's kind of a good place to go. Because if one thinks of, we harken back to the beginning of this conversation where Homo economicus was this sort of nasty atomic utilitarian character who was interested in nothing other than his, and it was usually his own welfare. Spinoza has what superficially looks like a similar sort of approach to what we should be striving towards, which is that we should be rational animals, and that we should be informed by reason in that sense. Not rational. We should be informed by reason. But our reason is constrained by a knowledge of everyone else around us. It is through substance, of course, that we become aware. And through reason, it wouldn't be reasonable to want something that everyone else couldn't have. Now, this idea of a constraint on reason and a constraint on desire seems to me a nice boundary condition for understanding not only the kind of development that we want, but also that gets us nicely back to the commons, that gets us back to the idea of how it is that we constrain our desires and figure out ways of living together so that we can sort of restrain